Good. Now, we greet each other on this big ancient feast of the Epiphanted, it would be in Greek, the encounter that comes to in translation. It's our Candlemas, an ancient English word which is still there actually in the old calendars. It's one of the few, like Christmas and Michaelmas, which has come through the Reformation period with the word Mass at the end of it. So it is the blessing of the holy light, the blessing of the candles throughout the year. It happens then on this day in different forms all through the Catholic world and links us actually with the East. Hence I'd like to pause on this theme of light on this meditation. So we'll go into the optic of the other element of light, that is spiritual light, of which these candles, these flames, are but an indication. But we live in a world of speaking signs, and we need to be aware of the power of these signals that we launch into the atmosphere, lest we miss their poetic and indeed sacramental power. The heart's deepest need makes us long for union with God. So, when we speak of the heart being on fire, the flame of love, we are using familiar language which is suggesting something very profound and ancient in the human experience. Love is a flame. And this reaching up of the heart in a way which expresses itself outside itself is something which is real to our cult. We're not just mind. We express in tangible, visible forms what is going on inside us. The act of knowing is an act of union. By knowledge, we penetrate the nature of an object and make the object our own. Now, in this discourse, there are two levels operating all the time. One we're familiar with, that which I mentioned, the flame of the heart in love, and that which is more difficult to grasp, what is happening between the soul, which is immaterial, and God, who is also spiritual and unseen. But in the realm of worship, this is what we're involved in. We go from the familiar to the unfamiliar, which is actually the ultimate reality. For when all fails, that will remain. The soul will remain without the body after death until the final resurrection, but then this invisible world is the only reality. So it is reality, and we mustn't follow the mentality of the world which attaches true meaning to what is visible and tangible. It's the era of materialistic communism, which based all on the matter, bliss in this life, and life eternal cancelled by the fact that it was presumed that without the brain, without the material, the soul cannot exist. Something which has been disproved recently by modern science, because we know from very carefully controlled operations that the soul does not depend on the brain for its independence. It is something which, by the way, one needs to bear in mind if talking with somebody who comes at one with that argument, that without the brain there is no existence. The soul is attached to the material. Modern science, neutral science, just objective investigation and proof, is able to indicate that is not the case. But that's a study of its own. If one wants to go into it, all one has to do is to investigate the many YouTubes out there in which there have been carefully controlled operations and brain death, in fact even induced, so as to operate, for instance, on an impossible part of the brain, to show that the brain can be dead and the soul can be observing from without what is going on inside the operating theatre, and then can travel on and then eventually come back. It is a universal experience now, especially strong in recent years because of the increased skill of medical staff able to call people back. But it just indicates that this is the real world, that of the soul. And therefore in the liturgy we're handling reality, not something just poetic. By knowledge we penetrate the nature of an object and make the object our own. We mentally absorb it and it becomes part and parcel of ourselves. Love is also an act of union, and not merely of the desire of union. Now, this flame is something extremely rich in significance. When one thinks of two people on fire, there is an ecstasy in their heart. They reach out to each other. And so it is that the flame suggests something of the soul reaching out into the invisible, the spirit world. It disappears into the air after it's lost its power. The flame eventually goes up and down, and it actually disappears and combines with the air in some way. And more than that, the emitting source of light is all the time consuming itself and disappearing into its own sacrifice. Does any material form exist that provides a likeness for such a union? There does, the very wonderful one of light and heat. Our eyes, without approaching or touching it, see and take in the candle flame. So here there's a contact. There is this emission of light which comes through the air onto our retina and is transformed into the signals that come into our brain, which interpret it as this vision of light. But we are not actually the candle, but we're in relationship with it through this contact. Something exists of that nature also with our God. He is emitting his light to us in many ways. The truth, written, spoken, preached, communicated, but also the sacramental sphere in which there is life and true contact. But one can also contain the other for us who depend on the senses for our contact with the outside world. Hence it is the real reality of the liturgical sphere. It's containing presences and force. Therefore it has to be handled with the respect that those presences and forces themselves command. The way we're handling them is the way we're actually handling their source. We mustn't forget that, because especially if we're priests, we'll be judged very severely at the end of our life by the way we've handled what is God. But the same applies to any person coming into the presence of God, e.g. the way we come into church. God is there, noticing, and our sins in church are written on our copybook, as are acts of love. Nothing is forgotten. We're treating God directly, and therefore we don't play down to him, but take off our shoes, for he is our God. Eyes and candle remain where they were, and yet a union is effected. It is not a union of mingling and absorption, but the chaste and reverent union of the soul with God by knowledge. Now here we touch on knowledge. We notice that in the whole of the Gospel of St. John, there is a strong link between light and knowledge. We know, we see. Now in Greek, theorein means to see, but it gives us the word theory. A theory is what we see with our mind. The same parallel exists in Latin. Contemplari is to behold, to regard, to look at, to watch attentively. But contemplation is the contact between mind, between soul and truth, and between man and God eventually, but also of truth in itself. A contemplative soul is seeing things as they are, and that is pre-Christian. Already in the ancient philosophers, there was this distinction between contemplative life and active life, but for them it meant in practice this difference between the slave and the philosopher. The slave had to work and had the active life, keeping mind and soul together by work. The contemplative life was that of the person free to engage with reality on a higher plane. That's how it was seen in those days. It was the bios theoretikos and the work of the one who had to just survive. So that was understood in the Christian centuries then as the privilege of certain souls who could have the luxury of having time to engage in pure love. That is also our own realm. We are all called to be somewhat of John the beloved disciple, enjoying moments of repose on the Sacred Heart, accessible to us because we have the fullness of the divine life in our midst in the Blessed Sacrament. We are all invited warmly to just gaze in that contemplation at the host, and there we are looking at love, and we are knowing love, and we are watching love, even though we cannot see it. When we look into the eyes of the Lord in the Blessed Sacrament, he's looking back at us, and there is this knowing of love. Only people who know each other in love know each other in depth. It's not enough to know about a person, but we know a person that we love. We know how that person thinks. As we say, how that person ticks. We know the inside of the person. We love that person for what that person is. But it takes time. And if there is not time, then we haven't relationship. Again, an indication of the poor quality of much of our relationship. If we, for instance, cannot be still with another person, we're not in relationship. And the proof is that we prefer, for instance, to look at a mobile phone rather than look into the eyes of the person opposite us. The mobile phone is more of a reality than the person opposite us, and we're not relating to that person. The same too with our God. We can cancel the true intimacy with God even by good things, such as many vocal prayers. We can be talking at God and not actually looking at him. We can cancel our encounter on a deep level by activism even in the contemplative life, the illness even of the pious souls. Too much going on. We're fidgeting even in our prayer. Be still and know that I am God. And when we know, we are happy to be with. The proof of people who are truly in love is they're able to be with each other without a word and be relaxed. Until they've got to that point, they're still immature and nervous about it. They're aware of being together and not relaxed with being together. A child doesn't always have to speak when he's with his mother, but if the mother isn't there, he notices it straight away and starts to cry. We're happy just to be with Jesus, just to be with, and we're in peace. Since, as Scripture says, God is truth, and since whoever knows the truth mentally possesses it, so by right knowledge of him, our minds possess God. God is present in the intellect, whose thoughts of him are true. Now that is also related to our correct thinking. In the East, the word orthodoxy is very important to them. It defines their state, and they are fairly keen that this correct, direct, orthos is correct, upright, is straight, is correct also in all its patterns in the interior world. Because if we do not have correct thoughts, then the doxane, the actual thinking and the glorifying of God, becomes crooked. And that is the fount of heresy. Now, it's important in our time that we be aware of that issue, because we need to have correct thought in our mind, because if we don't, it leads to also poison coming into our relationship. If we're misinformed about a person, we're going to be poisoned in our attitude to that person. But also things in regard to that person we need to get straight. We need to have correct thinking in our minds. Now, in our day, a lot of incorrect thinking is in the air, often because it's transmitted by people, e.g. lay people, who haven't got the whole baggage. It's actually very frustrating when one overhears conversations going on in which they're all disagreeing and all wrong, because they're all missing the point or all arguing from incomplete premises. One needs therefore to have the baggage to be able to know and smell a rat. In other words, know what is what in our thought. That means in practice being well informed and reading, yes, catechesis and theology. We can't be just basing it on the latest magazines and, as it were, hand-me-downs, what other people have said and thought. We need to go to the sources, because the truth doesn't depend on people who are saying this or that. The truth is the truth. So we need to know where to find the truth. It's in our catechesis, it's in our church documents, not in what so-and-so has said in the last 20 minutes. And therefore, this knowing of Jesus means also respecting that he is the Logos and that he alone has the right to teach. The truth teaches calmly, but has to be perceived calmly, not in polemics. In the raising of the voice, there's too much in the air to perceive the truth calmly. We learn the truth on our own with a book or through some good lecture. We don't learn it in an argument. To know God is to be one with him, as the eye becomes one with the candle flame by looking at it. But the light of the candle flame cannot be separated from its heat. Now here we come to something else. Is it not true that when somebody comes into the room, if that person is in a state of warmth and light, we are content when that person comes, and we secretly say, I will be refreshed by this person's coming, and by the going of that person back into his life, I will have been refreshed and upbuilt. If, on the other hand, somebody in darkness comes in, do we not somehow, in our heart of hearts, say to ourselves, here comes a heavyweight, I wish this were over already? And we try to keep the thing as civil as possible, but in our heart of hearts, all we want is that he be not there. Well, there is a profound truth in this. If we're going through life ourselves, not giving off that warmth, we are in darkness for other people, and in the end we will perhaps cop on that people are avoiding us, and we don't actually ask in time, is there perhaps a reason? Being on this world a source of healing for all within the world around us is a great art. It's made of that stepping into the other person's skin. How would that person feel with this word about to come out of me? Or how can I give joy to that person by this little joke, this little cuddle, this little word on a text, this letter with a little joke inside it, this little smiley here and there? They're all tiny sparks of healing. If, on the other hand, I couldn't care less and barge my way through everyone else like through an object, then we're our own worst enemy and everyone else is to boot. This question of going through life concerns us all, and we need to be careful that we don't go with heavy feet into people's lives and souls. Souls are delicate, but they can easily be warmed by also little things. And they're all hurting more or less, and they are waiting for somebody to come along and make the burden lighter. Light, then, and heat is something that we know all about. A child knows about it and instinctively feels where there is goodness. If one observes child behavior, little children now, very quickly they suss out where there is warmth and who they can trust. After a while, in the initial stages, they're a bit shy, but then very quickly they pick up this person can be trusted. And the Lord has put in their beings the way in which they express that, even without many words. It's part of humanity. We were meant to heal in our physicity as well, but certainly by the eyes, which are the lamps of the soul. We can say much through the eyes and the mouth. They can radiate warmth and heat even across the barrier of languages and cultures, as can aggressiveness in our sight, or some kind of huff in our mode of addressing a person. There are things which are picked up immediately by all, actually even by animals. Higher animals, too, know after a while who they can trust. Just observe them. Now, this all in the context of the blessing of the candles of the year at Candlemas. We had a beautiful celebration here in the Hermitage this morning with incense and everything, with a mixture of ancient and modern chants, and much can be done with the ancient rituals of the Church, made contemporary, but the advantage being that in our new Missal there are many alternatives. What I mean is that we have different degrees of solemnity, but there are ways and means of doing out of simple things very beautiful things. It doesn't have to be extremely complex. And the temptation to say, I can't do all that, therefore I won't do a thing, well, that's just a cop-out. Basically, what I'm saying is this: it's all poetry, therefore it has no wastage. If it's worth doing, we can do it well, even with simple things when the heart is engaging. But I want to zoom into something specific this day. It's something which is linked with this feast, but for another reason. It's the question of fire and light, also in the Easter context. We are already in the countdown to Easter, Septuagesima, Sexagesima, Quinquagesima, and then it will be Quadragesima. That's 40 days. The old counting is 70, 60, 50, and then 40 days. So we're already into the countdown, and therefore Lent is only just about a week away. Now, we're all therefore going towards the light, the explosion of light at the end of Lent, and this is fairly central to our faith and links us to our Eastern brethren. We've managed across the centuries to keep much in the Easter Triduum which has not become completely cerebral and mental. The poetic element, the expressive element is there still, and in that object needs to be understood and taken for what it is. I remember That was one thing that I found missing in the Protestant thing. Easter was not well celebrated because only the mind was at work. And it's very depleting with regard to the fullness of the person that we are. We need signs and signals, we need to experience, we need feeling, we need atmosphere, and indeed we need light and darkness. This morning we started the chapel in complete darkness, and then we came in and carried the light with us, and those lights ended on the altar. That is, the 4 candles were already being carried as part of the procession. It makes a big difference going from darkness into light, but very simple things which create an atmosphere and have meaning. Now, I want to go into something very specific. It's what happens with regard to the holy fire itself. We know from the Gospels that light was part of the original encounter. The angels seen by the people coming to the tomb were in bright light. Their garments were shining. We know also that when John outran Peter and stood outside, and then Peter went into the tomb after the report of Mary Magdalene, even though, as it says in this same gospel passage, it was early, it was before dawn actually, it was still dark, it does say, they saw, and it says exactly what they saw, inside the tomb, and all the details are given. Well, that could only happen if there was light in the tomb, not coming from the non-existent sun at that time of night. So it's from the beginning that light is there. As we know, after the Edict of Milan in 313, Constantine made it illegal to persecute the Christians, and this tolerance came in, and very quickly he himself was the initiator of the recuperation of the roots of Christianity in the holy places, sending his holy mother Helena there, and in 326, with the help of experts and hard work, they were able to locate Calvary and Golgotha and the tomb. What had happened was the Romans themselves had made it inaccessible through filling it all in with earth and all the rest of it, which actually was a great blessing in disguise, because it kept things as they were. And so they found them. The only thing was they weren't sure which of the 3 crosses was the real one, and then there was a miracle which indicated which one it was. Somebody had an accident and fell, maybe to death, but anyway, the person immediately was given back life and touching this cross, and therefore knew that's the one they knew, and this was the one that was venerated. And therefore, things started to happen. This all happened in 326, but Constantine then gave command that his mother organized the building of the church, which would cover this area. So it happened, and there was a prayer made by a bishop that the Lord would indicate his pleasure by sending a miracle on the first Easter after its completion, and the holy light appeared for the first time there, at least in recorded history, and appeared ever since. Same time, same channel, as we would say. It's on Holy Saturday, and it happens there. The light was lit already lit by God there at the beginning of the life of this new basilica, and then it's extinguished, the holy light of the Holy Sepulchre, on Holy Saturday once a year. And then God himself lights it on Holy Saturday in the hands of the Patriarch each year. And it's the one time in the year when designated airlines are allowed to take a covered but living flame to the main areas of the world. The different patriarchates of the world get it. It gets as far as Vienna as well. And so this light is the holy light, to Hagios. But we need to look at it a bit because it's linked with the feast that we have on this day, the Hippopante, the encounter, the 2nd of February, when we celebrate light in our candles and in our churches. The nature of the miracle is well known. It changed in detail when around 1080 they ceased to have the patriarch reciting the prayers for the holy light outside the inner chamber of the tomb. The tomb itself was sealed, but there was this grate which allowed them to see what was going on, therefore they could see. And he would only go in after the miracle had happened, and from the light which had been ignited there from heaven, he would then light the candles of the others in church. In about 1080, the difference was made that henceforth he would go in to the sealed tomb, because it's sealed in the morning, and the light has been put out, and he would go in, and the Armenian patriarch would be in the the next chamber, the antechamber to it, observing what was going on. And then he would come out, the Greek patriarch would come out, because the Greek patriarch is the one that goes back to St. James. Remember now, the question of having another patriarch in Jerusalem is recent in church history comparatively, because that wouldn't have happened way back. There would have been one there, and that would the one going back to St. James would have been the present Greek one there. So that's the historical line, and therefore that explains why it always happens in his hands. Now, the light then comes, and it is something which is of a different order from all light that we know. It is something which has been examined by theologians and by experts for many years, because it brings the question of, are we handling here the uncreated light itself? Because it is a light which behaves in a miraculous way, to such an extent that people have wondered, is it the uncreated light of Mount Tabor and of the resurrection itself? Well, basically, what experts say is this: the actual moment of sparking from heaven, that this light, the initial moments are a participation in the uncreated light. It is the power of the resurrection itself coming through. And that would explain why it behaves in a special way and doesn't have the ordinary effects of light in damaging. And then, when it is diffused to others, it is then of a different order, although still having miraculous properties in the first minutes, not burning the beard. It is then becoming ordinary created light, transmitted by a miracle of preservation from its consequences. But the actual texture of the light and fire in the initial stages is not the same as the light that is in our lamps and candles. It is different and also has an ecstatic effect on those who touch it, because when it's put against the face, it doesn't burn the face, it gives a feeling of electrifying joy and ecstasy, which the witnesses will tell you about. It contains a power from on high, which is participation in the joy of the resurrection. Therefore, it is close to the origin, the uncreated light. And we remember that there's a link between the Holy Sepulchre and Tabor. The two miracles are linked. It is known that the Lord gave the apostles that rendezvous at a mountain, a place where he had told them to go. And they went there, and 3 of them had already been there before with him and had had this ecstatic experience of the transfiguration. And therefore, when they got back there after the resurrection, but this time with the others except Judas, they were on familiar ground, and that same light was seen again, this time after the Passion. But there's a link between those two events, because we remember that Moses and Elijah did speak of his exodus that he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. And it was back there in Galilee that they were told to go, and they would see him in that majesty which was his rightful place. He was then reigning over the cosmos. Now, this then is something to be borne in mind. It has a lot of sense that there is in this element of light, which we find in all ecstasy and in contact with God, something which has been examined by the mystics and theologians as some accompaniment and accoutrement of the presence of God. There is light around God, and God is essential light. Remember, the first command was fiat lux, let there be light. So this light is interesting. We're handling here what we're going to, and people have had experiences of death, near death, whatever, often speak about going towards a light, a very bright light. Now, I'd like to pause here for a second because I want to go into some detail about what we're handling when we're handling light in the second part. A few years ago, this remarkable testimony was given to mankind. Patriarch Diodorus I, who had been ordained deacon in Jerusalem as early as 1944 and occupied the patriarchal throne from 1981 to 2000, he, during the Holy Week of 1998, a few days before Holy Saturday, consented to give an interview. And this then is from the horse's mouth. It was a good Danish scholar, Niels Christian Hift, who was giving the interview, and so we just have here the textual truth as taken down word for word by this good, honest scholar. So, when he died in September of 2000, this good patriarch had held the patriarchal office for 19 years and been present at the Holy Fire ceremony for 63 consecutive years. So these are his answers. After all the lights are extinguished, I bow down and enter the first chamber of the tomb. From here I find my way through the darkness to the inner room of the tomb where Christ was buried. Here I kneel in holy fear, and I say certain prayers that have been handed down to us through the centuries, and having said them, I wait. Sometimes I may wait a few minutes, but normally the miracle happens immediately after I have said the prayers. From the core of the very stone on which Jesus had laid, an indefinable light pours forth. It usually has a blue tint, but the color may change and assume many different hues. It cannot be described in human terms. The light rises out of the stone as mist rises out of a lake. It almost looks as if the stone is covered by a moist cloud, but it is light. This light each year behaves differently. Sometimes it covers just the stone, while other times it gives light to the whole sepulchre, so that people who stand outside the tomb and look into it will see it filled with light. The light does not burn. I have never had my beard burnt in all the 16 years I have been patriarch in Jerusalem and have received the holy fire. The light is of a different consistency from normal fire that burns in an oil lamp. At a certain point, the light rises and forms a column in which the fire is of a different nature, so that I am able to light my candles from it. When I have thus received the flame on my candles, I go out and give the fire first to the Armenian Patriarch and then to the Coptic. Thereafter, I give the flame to all people present in the church. We experience many miracles in our churches, and miracles are nothing strange to us, but none of these miracles have such a penetrating and symbolic meaning for us as the miracle of the holy fire. The miracle is almost like a sacrament. It makes the resurrection of Christ as real to us as if it occurred just a few years ago. I have been in Jerusalem since 1939, when I came to the city at the age of 15. I have attended the ceremony of the Holy Fire for all these years, and have thus been a witness to the miracle 61 times. For me, it is not a question of whether I believe in the miracle or not. I know it is true. So he was getting on in years, and in 1998 he was suffering from an illness, and for the first time since he was in office was not able to carry out the Holy Fire ceremony alone. A few days after his interview with the Danish professor on Holy Saturday, he was conveyed on a chair to the Church of the Resurrection, and then, once he reached the entrance of the Holy Sepulchre, he entered the monument's antechamber, seated in a wheelchair. As it was not possible for him to enter the tomb's inner chamber on account of the narrowness of the entrance, he assigned the completion of the rite to the Bishop of Eleftheropolis, Christodoulos Saridakis. The same occurs in 1999. Now here we have, therefore, the testimony of a younger man. He was ordained deacon in 1962 and lived in Jerusalem for 54 years since 1957. So in a conversation we had on the 10th of January 2010, he described in a particularly revealing manner all that he experienced in the interior of the sepulchre. So here we are, word for word. Your Grace, is it true that on Holy Saturday in 1998 and 1999, Patriarch Diodorus assigned to you the responsibility of completing the rite of the Holy Fire? It is true. Those years, Patriarch Diodorus was quite ill, and during the rite he remained in the antechamber of the sepulchre, seated in a wheelchair. What happened exactly when you entered the interior chamber? I immediately began reading the special prayer, and when that was finished, I noticed that the tombstone had started to perspire, in inverted commas. As time went on, the phenomenon became all the more intense, and it was as if it was completely covered by liquid myrrh that came out of its interior. At the same time, along with the liquid myrrh, a very intense blue light appeared which covered the entire tombstone. At that moment, the holy oil lamp miraculously ignited. And is that when you lit the bundles of your candles from the lamp? No, it was not necessary. I held the bundles of my candles over the tombstone, over the blue light, and they immediately ignited. Exactly the same extraordinary events occurred the following year as well. Was the Armenian representative also present in the edicule antechamber at that time? Of course. And all that you saw, he saw as well. He saw it all as well. He was a very good man, Priest Razmik, who is now in Australia. When the blue light appeared and the lamp ignited, he was kneeling in prayer, exactly at the entrance of the interior chamber. He was privileged to see everything. How long did the presence of the blue light last? Not long. 1 to 2 minutes? Approximately. Your Grace, at that moment, how did you feel? These things cannot be described. You come into contact with God. Thank you very much. Go with God. We have the testimony of Patriarch Irenaeus in 2005. He presided over the CE from 2001 to 2005, and so we have this testimony. Your Beatitude, does the miracle take place once you've completed the reading of the special prayer or during it? Sometimes even during it. What exactly takes place at that moment? Suddenly, the entire tomb fills with the holy light. It is a blue light. It is a shocking experience. beyond us. It is a blue flame that hovers. The entire tomb is filled with this flame. It is not easy for one to express. How exactly do the bundles of your candles ignite? At the moment when I lift the 4 bundles with the 33 candles, these immediately ignite from the blue flame that hovers and fills the space, which soon takes on the golden colour of a regular flame. Is it true that at that moment the holy fire does not burn? Of course! The holy fire during those first moments does not burn at all. All the times I participated in the rite as patriarch, not one single hair of my beard was burned. And all people who have the holy light, that is, the lay people, monks and nuns, all have that same experience. In the first minutes it doesn't burn, and they wave it over their beards, their veils, everything, and it's just a healing of divine bliss. Nothing burns, and the basilica never catches fire, despite the fact it's full of heat and flames. I just conclude with this last testimony, which makes the link with the sacramental sphere, and is a good point at which to conclude, going back to what I started with. So this is Patriarch Theophilus III, and it's 2009 that he gives us this testimony. What I can tell you about the rite of the Holy Fire is that the power of faith is what causes the miracle. It is a soul-stirring experience which one lives at that moment. And this experience is the same as the experience of the sacrament of the Holy Eucharist, during which the bread and wine are transformed into the body and blood of Christ. The experience of the Holy Fire is not easily described or explained with words. One understands how small and insignificant one is at that moment. So, when we hold this blessed flame in our hand on this day of the 2nd of February, Candlemas, and when we hold our holy light at Easter, we are remembering that we're linked with the primeval light of our dawn. Let there be light. This light was the light that we were destined to enter, but we were to enter there only after the test. A third of the angels, that is, became demons. We, on our side, have still time, but we have to choose between light and darkness. And once we leave this world, that is the issue, going towards the light or the darkness. But the fundamental option is already taken within the arc of time. As long as we have one breath and one moment of lucidity, we can say yes to the light, or we can curse it. We can give off light or darkness. But to be on the winning side is to be close to the frontal experience of the explosion of light of Easter. I have conquered. Holy Saturday. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, this morn we sing the chant of thy long yesterday, and act in corners four the drama born by ages dimmed. For 'tis the orient ray that moved Prémontré's dawn, and fossiled bars bear music from afar, nay, from the tomb of every tomb to come, wherein the stars at noon again this day will pierce earth's gloom. This is the noontide, where the fire unlit shall come again without the help of man. And ancient might, too bright for human wit, will calmly strike this
wick as no craft can. For 'tis the ray that blasted Turin's face, that toys with timely sparks from outer space.